"You're embarrassing me, Miles. Just say sorry to him. It's not that deep." Those were the words. Not whispered, not regretted. Said flatly, the way you speak to someone whose feelings have quietly stopped mattering to you. And the worst part wasn't the words themselves. It was that she didn't even look up from her phone when she said them. "My name is Miles Hardy. I'm 36 years old. I work in commercial real estate. I coach youth basketball on weekends. And until 8 months ago, I believed, genuinely, completely believed, that my wife Mia was the best decision I'd ever made. I'm telling you this not because I need your sympathy, but because I need you to understand the kind of man I was before all of this. I was the kind of man who trusted completely, who loved without keeping score, who would have walked through fire for his marriage without being asked twice. That man almost destroyed me. It started on a Tuesday evening. Mia came home from what she called dinner with friends, and within 20 minutes of walking through the door, she was sitting across from me explaining, not asking, explaining, that I needed to call Larry Kingston and apologize for being rude and aggressive toward him at a mutual friends gathering the previous weekend. I had not been rude. I had not been aggressive. Larry had made a comment about Mia's appearance. Something lingering, something that crossed the line. And I had told him, calmly, to watch his mouth. That was it. That was the extent of my crime. His sensitive, Miles. You know his history. I looked at my wife, the woman I'd built a life with, and I said, I'm not apologizing. The silence that followed felt like the first crack in something I didn't yet know was already broken. The silent treatment lasted 4 days. I want you to understand what 4 days of silence from the person who shares your bed actually feels like. It isn't peaceful. It's a slow, suffocating thing, like being underwater in a room you once felt safe in. She moved around me like I was furniture. Cooked for one, answered my questions with single words, and took phone calls in the bathroom with the tap running. On the 3rd day I tried. I sat beside her on the couch and said, Mia, talk to me. She said, there's nothing to talk about until you do what I asked. Not until we work this out. Not until we understand each other. Until I did what she asked. Like a man being managed. Like a child being corrected. I remember staring at the side of her face. This woman I'd married 3 years ago. This woman whose name I'd said in front of God and our families. And feeling something cold move through me. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Something closer to recognition. Because here's what I hadn't told her yet. The previous weekend, before the incident with Larry, my closest friend Darius had pulled me aside at that same gathering. His face was doing something uncomfortable. The face of a man carrying information he wishes he didn't have. He'd said, Miles, I need to tell you something. But not hey. I'd said, is it serious? He'd looked across the room to where Mia was laughing at something Larry said, her hand briefly touching his forearm. He said, yeah, it's serious. We never got the chance to finish that conversation. But on that 4th night of silence, lying awake beside a wife who had become a stranger, I picked up my phone and texted Darius 2 words. Tell me. He called instead of texting. That alone told me everything about the weight of what he was carrying. It was 11:23 p.m. Mia was asleep, or performing sleep. I could no longer tell the difference. I took the call in the kitchen, standing at the counter in the dark, and I listened to my best friend of 14 years tell me the thing that split my life cleanly into before and after. Darius said he'd seen them together 6 weeks earlier. Not at a group gathering. Not accidentally. Together, Larry's car parked outside a restaurant on Clement Street. The two of them at a corner table, close in the way that people are close when they've stopped being careful. Darius had been with his girlfriend Nina, on their way somewhere else, and he'd stopped walking when he saw them through the window. He watched for 3 minutes. He said Mia laughed at something Larry said and reached across the table and held his hand. I didn't know what to do. Miles, he said. I told myself maybe it was innocent. But then at the party last weekend, the way she reacted when you confronted him, the way she protected him, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I didn't say anything for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside a car passed. The whole ordinary nighttime world continuing without any awareness that mine had just collapsed. How long do you think? I said finally. Darius exhaled. Honestly, the way they were sitting together, that wasn't new. That was comfortable. I thanked him. I hung up. I stood in my dark kitchen for 11 minutes. I counted because my mind needed something mechanical to hold on to, and then I made a decision. I was not going to react. Not yet. I was going to know, completely, irrefutably, before I moved a single piece on this board. Because the old Miles, the trusting, open-handed Miles, had already lost. And the man standing in that dark kitchen was someone different. Someone just beginning to understand that love without strategy is just vulnerability with a pretty name. I opened my phone, found the number of a private investigator my colleague had used during his own divorce 2 years earlier. I stated it for a moment. Then I saved it under the name Architect. Because that's what I was about to become. Not a victim, not a fool, an architect, quietly, patiently designing the truth that everyone was about to have to live inside. I went back to bed. Lay down beside my wife, stayed at the ceiling. She shifted in her sleep and her hand accidentally touched mine. I didn't move away. I didn't flinch. I just lay there in the dark and felt the full, devastating weight of loving someone who had already decided you weren't enough. And I let it hurt, completely, one last time. Because starting tomorrow, hurt was no longer going to be my operating system. I contacted the investigator on a Wednesday morning. His name was Brent Kaye. Former law enforcement, 12 years private practice, a voice like gravel and an email signature that said simply, facts don't lie. People do. I told him what I needed. Documentation. Dates, locations, photographs if possible. Nothing illegal. Just truth organized into something no one could argue with. He said, give me 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Mia and I existed in a strange suspended version of our marriage. The silence had thawed slightly. She spoke to me again, smiled occasionally, even made dinner twice that week. And I smiled back. Asked about her day. I poured her wine. I was the perfect, unsuspecting husband. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, because I'd see her phone light up and watch her angle the screen away from me, and I'd feel that cold recognition again, that quiet, devastating knowledge sitting in my chest like a stone. And I'd pour more wine and ask about her sister and smile like a man with nothing to hide. On the 9th day, Brent sent me a preliminary email. 3 photographs attached. I opened them in my car during lunch, engine running, and I sat there for a very long time. Larry's apartment building. Mia's car parked outside. A timestamp, 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. The same Tuesday she told me she was at a spa day with her colleague Jess. I forwarded the email to a folder I'd created and password protected. I labeled it Architecture. Then I called Brent back. Keep going, I said. I want everything. 3 weeks into Brent's investigation, Mia brought up the apology again. We were eating breakfast. A Sunday. Sunlight coming through the kitchen window. Coffee steaming. The whole seemed domestic and peaceful and completely fake. She set her mug down and said, in a tone she'd clearly rehearsed, Miles, I've been thinking. Larry's birthday is next month. There's going to be a dinner. It would mean a lot to me if you two had sorted things out by then. I looked at her over my coffee cup. Larry's birthday dinner. A room full of people who knew them when they were together. Mia wanting me present, compliant, apologetic. Her husband performing reconciliation while her ex sat at the head of the table. I said, you want me at Larry's birthday dinner. I want things to be normal, Miles. Normal, I repeated. She held my gaze with the particular steadiness of someone who has been practicing this conversation internally. You upset him. A simple sorry fixes it. Why are you making this so hard? I thought about the photographs in my password-protected folder. I thought about Brent's update 2 days earlier. A 4th location confirmed. A 5th date documented. I thought about 14 years of Darius's friendship and the discomfort on his face at that party. I set my mug down. Looked at my wife. Really looked at her. The way I used to. The way that once felt like coming home. I'm not going to Larry's birthday dinner, I said quietly. And I'm not apologizing to him. Not now. Not ever. She pushed back from the table. Then I don't know what we're doing here, Miles. I said, neither do I. But I knew exactly what I was doing. She just didn't know it yet. Brent was good. But Marcus was better. My brother had worked in cybersecurity for 9 years before moving into consulting. I hadn't planned to involve him. But one evening he came over for dinner. Mia was out, allegedly with Jess again, and he noticed something on the shared tablet we kept on the kitchen counter. "Miles," he said slowly, "come look at this." It was a notification, a brief flash before the screen locked, a message preview from an app disguised as a calculator. A Vault app, the kind people download specifically to hide conversations. Marcus looked at me. I looked at him. "How long?" he said. "I've suspected for about a month." He sat down at the counter, ran his hand over his face. Then he straightened and shifted into the focused, technical version of my brother that I'd seen him become in professional settings. "I'm not going to break into her phone. That's not something either of us should do. But I want you to understand, the existence of that app on a shared device tells you something legally significant." "What does it tell me?" "It tells me she's been deliberately concealing communication, which matters when you talk to a lawyer." I hadn't said the word divorce out loud yet, not even to myself. It had existed only as a shape in the dark, formless, enormous, terrifying. But sitting in my kitchen watching my brother's expression, I felt it take form. I said, "Recommend me someone good." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I already have someone in mind," he said. "I made the call 2 weeks ago. I was waiting for you to be ready." That's the thing about people who love you correctly. They prepare for the storms you haven't admitted are coming yet that I didn't plan for it to happen the way it did. Brent called me on a Friday afternoon with a final report. Comprehensive, documented, legally organized. 7 confirmed dates. 4 locations. Photographs, timestamps, a paper trail clean enough to present in any courtroom. He emailed the full file while we were still on the phone. I downloaded it, sat in my car outside my office building and read every page. Then I drove home. Mia was in the kitchen when I walked in. Cooking, actually cooking, music playing, a glass of wine on the counter. She turned and smiled and said, "Good timing. Dinner's almost ready." I set my keys down, sat at the kitchen table, and I said, "Mia, I need you to sit down." Something in my voice reached her. The smile faded. She turned the stove off, sat across from me, the same table, always this table, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Something between guilt and the animal awareness of a person who senses a trap closing. I placed my phone on the table. Brent's report pulled up. The photographs. She looked at the screen. The color left her face completely. "Miles, don't," I said. Not loudly, not with venom. Just a single word that meant, whatever you're about to construct, don't. She closed her mouth. I said, "I want you to understand something. I'm not sitting here because I'm broken. I'm sitting here because you deserve to see my face when I tell you. I know everything. Every date. Every location. Every lie." She started crying. I stood up. "My lawyer will be in touch on Monday." Here's something Mia never paid close attention to. Our money. Not because she was careless, but because early in our marriage we divided responsibilities naturally. She managed the home, the social calendar, the relationship maintenance. I managed the finances. She knew roughly what we had. She did not know the details. And the details mattered enormously. 18 months earlier, I'd made a significant investment, a commercial property deal through my firm that had returned quietly and substantially. I hadn't hidden it from Mia. Exactly. It simply lived in an account she never asked about, in a structure my lawyer now confirmed was categorized as a pre-growth asset tied to professional earnings. Protected. Additionally, and this is where Marcus's legal contact proved invaluable, Mia had signed a financial agreement during our mortgage refinance 2 years ago. A document she'd reviewed briefly and signed without reading fully. That document contained a clause that became extraordinarily relevant during divorce proceedings involving documented marital misconduct. I'm not a vindictive man. I want to be clear about that. I did not build these protections as weapons. I built them because I'm someone who understands that structure matters, in buildings, in businesses, and in marriages. But when Mia's lawyer contacted mine expecting a straightforward split, what they received instead was a 60-page response that calmly and completely restructured the conversation. Mia called me after her lawyer briefed her. Her voice was different now. The practiced steadiness gone, something rawer underneath. "You knew," she said. You knew for a long time. Yes, I said. And you just waited. I wanted to be certain, I said. I'm certain now. She was quiet for a long moment. What about Larry? She said finally. Keep reading, I said. Page 43. Larry Kingston was not just Mia's ex-boyfriend. He was also, as of 14 months ago, a co-investor in a small property venture that Mia had quietly entered using $30,000 from a joint savings account I'd assumed was untouched. I hadn't known. Not until Brent's report surfaced a financial thread that led Marcus and my lawyer down a paper trail Mia had assumed was invisible. $30,000 withdrawn in 3 installments over 4 months, funneled through a holding company Larry had created. A holding company in which Mia held a 20% stake under her maiden name. This was not just infidelity. This was financial misconduct, marital asset dissipation, the kind of thing that doesn't just affect a divorce settlement. It reframes the entire legal landscape of the proceedings. My lawyer, a sharp and unhurried woman named Patricia Osei, presented this to the court with the calm efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of documentation. She laid out every withdrawal, every transfer, every filing. Larry's own legal situation deteriorated rapidly afterward. The holding company attracted scrutiny. Questions emerged about how it had been capitalized and whether other investors had been accurately represented. His fame, already aware of his conduct issues from Marcus's earlier filing, now had financial impropriety added to an increasingly uncomfortable profile. He resigned before he could be asked to leave. I heard this from Marcus, who heard it from Derek, who still moved in those circles. I was sitting in my new apartment when I got the message, a clean, quiet space I'd rented 2 months earlier. Good light. High ceilings. My father's watch box on the nightstand. I read Marcus's text. Set my phone down. Made coffee. I felt not triumph. Just stillness. The particular stillness of a man who has finally stopped bracing for impact. During the divorce proceedings, people chose sides. That's always how it goes. The social ecosystem of a marriage fractures along fault lines you never knew existed, and suddenly you're discovering who people actually are underneath the dinner party versions of themselves. Most of our mutual friends went quiet. A few chose Mia, people who'd known her longer, people who found the full truth too complicated to hold. I didn't blame them. Complicated truths are uncomfortable furniture. But Darius stayed. And Darius, because he still moved through some of those shared social spaces, occasionally heard things. He called me one evening and said, "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to hear it without it pulling you backward." He told me that at a gathering 3 weeks after I'd filed, Mia had told people that I'd been emotionally unavailable throughout our marriage. That I'd been cold, withholding, too focused on work. That she'd felt alone for years. That Larry had simply been someone who made her feel seen. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Is any of it true?" Darius paused. "Miles, you coach kids on weekends because you wanted to give back. You flew her mother to a specialist when she got sick. You built that woman a life." "That's not what I asked," I said. "Was I emotionally available?" A longer pause. "You could have let her in more," he said carefully. "You carry things alone. Always have." I sat with that. Didn't deflect it. Didn't argue. "You're right," I said. "That's something I'm working on." Because retribution without self-reflection is just recycled pain. And I was done carrying things that didn't belong to me, including the versions of myself that had made me easier to betray. The night before Patricia was scheduled to present our final settlement terms, Mia called me at 9 p.m. I answered. I don't fully know why. Maybe because part of me, the emotionally raw, still healing part, needed to hear her voice one last time in a context that wasn't filtered through lawyers and documentation. She sounded tired. Not the performed exhaustion of someone seeking sympathy. Actually tired. The voice of a woman who had been living inside consequences for several months and had stopped fighting the weight of them. She said, "I just want to say I'm sorry. Not for the lawyers. Not for anything legal. Just, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this." I was quiet for a moment. Outside my window, the city moved. Headlights, distant music, the ordinary, unstoppable motion of a world that had continued without pause through all of this. "Why, Larry?" I said, not angrily, genuinely. She took a long time answering. "Because he made it easy," she said finally. And somewhere along the way I confused easy with right. I thought about that. Was any of it real? The marriage? Yes, she said immediately. At the beginning, yes. Completely. Where did it go? "I don't know," she said. "I think I stopped tending to it. And instead of telling you, I went somewhere else." I believed her. That was the painful part. I believed her. "I hope you figure out what you actually want," I said. "I mean that. Miles, get some rest before tomorrow," I said quietly. I hung up, sat in my good light, high-ceilinged apartment, poured a glass of water, looked at my father's watchbox on the nightstand. Then I went to bed and slept, deeply, cleanly, for the first time in months. The settlement was finalized on a Thursday morning. Patricia had done what she promised, methodically, precisely, without drama. The $30,000 removed from our joint account was recovered in full with interest, classified as dissipated marital assets. The commercial property investment remained mine, protected under the professional earnings clause Mia's lawyer had spent 3 weeks unsuccessfully trying to challenge. The house, our house, the one with the garden path and the porch light we'd argued about, was sold, the equity split in a manner that reflected the documented financial misconduct clearly and fairly. Larry Kingston, by that Thursday, was no longer at Vantage Capital. His holding company was under a separate civil review. The easy life he constructed on the edges of other people's relationships had begun, quietly and systematically, to come apart. I walked out of Patricia's office into a gray Thursday morning and stood on the pavement and breathed. I won't tell you I felt triumphant. Movies want you to feel triumphant in moments like this. The swell of music, the lifted chin, the vindicated stride. Real life is quieter than that. What I felt was lighter, like a man who has been carrying a structural load he didn't realize was load-bearing until the moment it was finally lifted and he could stand at full height again. I called Darius. He answered on the first ring. "It's done," I said. "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. About Mia's voice the night before. About my dark kitchen 11 months ago. About a man who had trusted completely and loved without keeping score and almost lost himself in the process. "Like myself," I said. "For the first time in a long time. Like myself." I put the phone in my pocket and walked to my car. The city moved around me. Indifferent, relentless, alive. I moved with it.